I am Dustin Baker. We are here to chat about the 4-0 Vikings. This season could not have gone any better. I was talking with Josh, my good friend Josh Frey, who writes for VikingsTerritory.com, about how so ingrained in the spring and summer you think about this club as 7-10, 8-9, 9-8, whatever your record prediction was. Kudos to the few of you who said, 11, 6, 12, and 5. And now everything is so different because that feels like a faint memory that it would need an utter collapse in the vein of 2016 for the team to be like that again. So we want to start talking about some of this Viking stuff today. Josh, how you been, man?
I've been good, dude. I mean, obviously, 4-0 Vikings start. Can't ask for anything better than what we've seen over the past 4 weeks from the Purple Crew with playoff baseball starting. I need my Milwaukee Brewers to get a win today. Otherwise, I'm going to be in a really bad mood until Sunday when the Vikings hopefully beat up on the Jets in London on Sunday morning. But yeah, other than that, I'm doing really great.
Fantastic. All right, so I want to ask you, first of all, I haven't chatted with you about Vikings-Packers. Were you convinced, like this guy, that they were going to find a way to lose that thing and we were going to be ingrained in meme culture for indefinitely?
Man, it really felt like that for a while on Sunday. It was one of those moments where it's like, oh man, this is a classic Vikings moment, and it's a classic Packers moment as well, where all of a sudden they just pull something out of their hat, come away with a win, and then that's going to just flounder the season. The Vikings are going to just take a tumble. I was just reading the stars, hoping for something to happen there, and it ended up it worked out. I mean, missed 2 field goals, the weird interception where the ball hit Luke Musgrave and Romeo Doubs, and then somehow ends up in Shaq Griffin's hands. Like, it just, everything worked out on Sunday, and even though they did make that comeback, I think I think it's equally impressive that the Vikings managed to hold on to that lead as it would have been if they just continued going and won 42-7 or something like that. I mean, the fact that this team had the resolve that they did down the stretch of that fourth quarter, and I think honestly, a lot of that has to do with just the situation that Kevin O'Connell's been in over his first 2 years, where he's constantly playing those one possession games, constantly trying to find a way to pull wins out of his ass down the stretch of games. And I think that experience from this entire crew, minus the quarterback, obviously Sam Darnold, I think that those experiences over the past couple of years, I think definitely played a role in why the Vikings were able to ultimately pull that one out on Sunday. And it's really impressive to see. And 4-0, top of the NFC, on par with the reigning defending champs. Like, you can't ask for much more than that.
General Manager Kwesi Adafo-Mensah calls it situational masters. What's the phrase they used during 2022 to explain away all of the other deficiencies? I think that was the secondary perk for me. The obvious one was going to 4-0, beating the Packers at their stadium. Secondary perk to me was they had a brush with regular season adversity. They certainly had a boatload in the summer, but when we got to the regular season, it had been completely smooth sailing, and eventually, hopefully not this weekend, but soon they're going to be trailing in a game, and then we're going to figure out if this football team can do it from all angles. We know that they can hang on to a lead, which is pretty fantastic, but it's not always going to be, oh, hey, 28-0, we're doing the thing. It's going to get tricky, just a matter of when. All right, so this has been a really unsung development, in my estimation, over the last, week. We have the NFL trade deadline that is on election day. So I believe November 5th. You probably know that from your current job, right?
Yep.
The Vikings somehow can be buyers if they truly believe in their DNA. They are a Super Bowl contender, which they probably should. It'd be malfeasance to say, nah, we're good. They have a reduced draft capital piggy bank. Usually you trade draft picks if you're going to be a buyer. They will have a third rounder from Kirk Cousins' departure, but I don't think that's tradable right now. So they basically have a first, which I highly doubt they trade, a fifth, and then what? Maybe is it a sixth or seventh?
Sixth, maybe a couple sevenths, but yeah, it's a very, like you said, it's a very slim piggy bank at this point.
Yeah, so we're basically, talking about a fifth rounder and another late rounder, and then if other general managers are interested in the cabinet from 2026. So the Vikings can't be extreme bonanza buyers. They'd have to be diligent in figuring out who they could get. But let's chat. I talked with Thor Nystrom a little bit about this. But now that they're 4-0, it's like, all right, there's only 2 4-0 teams. And we think we know the Chiefs will have to be buyers if Raji Rice is confirmed to be out for the season. Start me off with a list or a name or two, a name that you're thinking that, hey, the Vikings should make the call.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to do this, we might as well start off big. I think the number one target, at least in my mind, if the Vikings are truly indeed all in on going after a Super Bowl this year, and like you said, it'd be kind of stupid at this point in the season to say that they're not all in on winning a Super Bowl, being atop the NFC and everything. So, I mean, looking around the league, I think Dexter Lawrence in New York is just an absolute monster, and I think he'd be a great fit on this defensive line. We talked about it all spring, all summer, how this Vikings team just doesn't have a massive presence on the defensive line at this point. And honestly, I mean, it's been serviceable through 4 weeks, but I think you can always get better at that defensive tackle position. And Dexter Lawrence has continued to just be one of the best players in the entire league at that position between his pass rushing ability. And week one, that game against the Giants, he was the one guy that seemed to constantly make an impact against the Vikings in that game. He just wreaked havoc on that interior offensive line. Ed Ingram, Garrett Bradbury had themselves a day trying to stop that guy all afternoon. So I think you get that guy, bring him in, and you throw him alongside Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, Dallas Turner, assuming he's healthy at some point. And you got him in the middle alongside all these edge rushers, a team that's already leading the league in pressures, sacks, all sorts of the metrics in terms of pass rush. This defense has already been really good, and I think you add a guy like that in the middle, a true difference maker at the defensive tackle spot that we've been urging the Vikings to go get for years now. I think that really puts the Vikings over the top and turns them into a true Super Bowl contender instead of one of the teams that can, maybe they can make an NFC championship game, win a playoff game or two, but ultimately I don't know if they're necessarily. I think that trade right there would by them as a true contender.
All right, so because this one is so sexy and high profile, we've got to dig into it to explore if it's realistic, because there might be some folks that watch the first 8 minutes of the show and say, sweet, we're going to get Dexter Lawrence. So right now he's 26. That's pretty awesome. Defensive tackles or nose tackles can play until they're, Linval Joseph's still playing. They can play well into their 30s. So we wouldn't have to worry about it being a rental, I don't think. And I think there is some noise that he could be on the trade block, but I don't know that it's like an open, like, hey, come get him. So we think he's in the trade rumor mill, at least a guy who could be dealt. The age is fine. What about the contract? It looks like if they were to trade him, they would have to swallow $28 million in dead cap. Would that mean that the Vikings would have to send a first rounder? What are we talking about from Lawrence's contract and the Vikings would-be price tag, or any team's price tag?
It's definitely a hefty contract that the Vikings would have to swallow. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you really think about it, I do think it would take a first round pick to get that guy on your defense. But at the end of the day, the Vikings, I think if they hold on to this first round pick next spring, they're going to be looking at the defensive tackle position pretty seriously. And I mean, you're trying to get a guy like Dexter Lawrence with that type of pick at that point. So I think going out and getting Dexter Lawrence is arguably better than going and getting a prospect that maybe could potentially one day turn into 80% of what Dexter Lawrence is at this point in his NFL career. So I have no qualms with trading away a first round pick, even if it is the 2025 first round pick, and then you just kind of chill out for the entire draft process. So I think that would be great. And honestly, I mean, the numbers of the contract do kind of scare me a little bit, especially as he does inch towards that age 30. But at the end of the Vikings, they've got oodles of cap space in 2025 and 2026 that they easily could fit Lawrence into their cap space if they need to, and they can find some wiggle room there and still fill out their roster just fine. Maybe it would take a few restructures here and there to truly feel comfortable in that position, but I think the Vikings have set themselves up really well to potentially go get a guy like that. Do the Giants even want to trade him? That's the big question, because they're still in the mix in that NFC East that really hasn't had a team emerge. And I don't think anybody in that division should really consider themselves sellers at this point. But if there was a team that was going to do that at some point, I think the Giants are the top candidate. And I think 8 weeks down the road, we're looking at a team that's probably at the bottom of that division at this point from what we've seen over the first month of the season. So I think it's feasible. Do I think it's probable? Not necessarily, but I wouldn't ultimately be shocked if Dexter Lawrence gets moved somewhere in a couple weeks.
So evidence to support a would-be trade is his guaranteed money runs out next year. Like, he only has $6 million on the books in guaranteed money. So in theory, I think the Vikings or any team could swing the trade and rework the deal or extend him so that the money, there's more guaranteed. And if that means reducing the cap hit this year, I think that would be an option. And I think the Giants would listen if it's a first rounder, because if you watched Hard Knocks, they very openly questioned whether or not they need a quarterback because they dressed it up in Daniel Jones's health, which was really just code as is he any good. And so I think a first rounder would do the trick. And Dexter Lawrence turns 27 in November. If this guy was 30, I'd be like, yeah, you're not give away a first rounder. Even if it was him, I'd think about it because he's so damn good. But I think if I got an alert to my phone here in 2 weeks that says Vikings trade 2021 or 2025 first rounder for Dexter Lawrence, I would think fantastic because of the reasons you mentioned. Lawrence is guaranteed to be good. And then secondarily, that pick is probably going to be like 28, 29, the way things are going right now.
Hopefully,
I can't believe I'm saying that out loud. It's going to be a late round pick. And then you never have to play the guy again. We already know he eats you for breakfast. So I love the Lawrence idea. Also, if the Vikings get in the market for a defensive tackle, which finally we hope they do in the draft, that position always takes more than a year to develop. Like Brian Breesy's finally getting good in New Orleans. He didn't do much as a rookie.
Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis in Philly, they're finally turning into something after slow years over the past few seasons.
Yeah, so there wouldn't, not that the Vikings, I don't know, maybe they will. Not that they're going to be a certified Super Bowl contender next year. It's just that fans will have to be patient with defensive tackles because they always take a little longer to bloom. So Dexter Lawrence, it sounds like we're both in on it. I really love the age because I know he can stay with the Vikings for 6-7 years if indeed they pull the trigger. What else do you got for trade targets? Because somehow this team can be a buyer.
So let's stick with the defensive tackle position for a little bit. But I think there's a guy out there that maybe is a little bit more feasible in terms of his price tag and ultimately what the Vikings' long-term plan probably is. I think he fits into that category as more of a rental, but that's Calais Campbell down in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
The dude's 38, but he's still putting up numbers in Miami. 1-3, don't look now, but they currently hold the number 2 overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. And with the AFC East, it still looks like that, despite the weird loss from Buffalo. It was Monday night against Baltimore or Sunday night, one of the two, I can't remember.
Sunday night.
But I still think that they run that division until somebody says that they don't. And it doesn't seem like anybody at this point. New England's done. Miami might be done if Tua isn't able to return healthy at this point. So they might try to turn some of their veterans over into some sort of assets that they can use in 2025 and beyond to try and rebuild their roster and maybe get some picks to go finally rebuild that offensive line because it's so bad right now. But I think Calais Campbell, if you're looking at a guy just for a one-year rental, go compete for a championship, that dude fits the bill. He's absolutely fantastic in the pass rush. He's 38, but he still plays like he's like 33. It's incredible the way that this dude's longevity has lasted throughout his entire career. And I think, again, if you want a guy that can really fill in the middle of the defensive line along those edge rushers and really give opposing offensive lines no options, no easy spots to go guard, I think Calais Campbell is a really nice fit in this Vikings defense.
This one gets on my nerves, not because of you, but because the Vikings could have signed him outright for about 5 months. Yep. I think I wrote probably half dozen articles that included him over the summer because he was always, you remember how the defensive tackle free agent pool was so robust and one by one they got chipped away. It got down to Calais Campbell. I remember tweeting that, like, it's Calais Campbell or bust. Now, in fairness to the Vikings, 37, 38, however old he is, maybe the Vikings didn't know that they were going to be 4-0 out of the gate and need somebody like Calais Campbell.
Calais Campbell probably didn't even know the Vikings were going to be 4-0. That's probably why I signed with the Dolphins. He's like, I want to go compete for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I always mentioned about him on this show and on VikingsTerritory.com is he never has an age-related decline. Like usually if you're exploring the free agency of a guy who's 37 or 38, you're going to get the skeleton of him, that might have a big game in the postseason, but the guy is always so consistent. Like he has a Hall of Fame resume if you're going to adjudicate by consistency and longevity. So I love Calais, and you can probably, because he's so old, you can probably ship a conditional 6th or 7th to Miami and get him. I highly doubt that any team is going to pony up anything more than that. And those deals are so common in the NFL now, the conditional 6th and 7th. Hey, if he plays more than 5 games, we get blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I love that one. And I will say that Jerry Tillery has played decent, better than I expected. Has made some decent plays throughout these 4 games. So if they stand pat, we know they're not in bad shape because the defense ranks tops in the league for DVOA, EPA per play. But yeah, Calais Campbell would be some gravy, if you will. All right, you got the lines covered. What else are you thinking?
I'm thinking I honestly, I don't really even want to touch this offense right now with just how good it has been. And that's why this assignment was kind of difficult for me, because it's like, I don't know if I even want to mess with the juju that's going on in Minnesota too much. So I'm going to stick with the defensive side of the ball, as crazy as it sounds, because that unit's just been absolutely fantastic. But Jonathan Jones, cornerback out of New England. He's obviously an older guy at 31, but as of now, through 4 weeks, he's been one of the best corners in the entire league. And he's a big reason why that New England defense is still playing semi-productive football despite some of the struggles on the offensive side. And Jonathan Jones, 31 years old, he's a smaller guy, but he can still, he plays the boundary really well with his physical style of play, his absolute burner speed on the boundary. And I think if you want a guy that can really lock down opposing wide receivers, I think he's a really good target. And obviously Shaq Griffin, Byron Murphy, all these guys, Griffin, everybody, they've been absolutely fantastic over the past 4 weeks, and just a lot better than I expected them to be at this point in the season. But that is the one area of the defense that I'm looking at and like, is this really going to last all year? Are they really going to be able to continue to pull this thing off with the guys that they've got in that defensive backfield? And I think if they were to go target a guy, it probably is going to be at that cornerback position, at least in my opinion, just on the outside looking in. And I think Jonathan Jones, 31, expiring contract, I don't think you'd have to give up a ton to go get him. His deal isn't exactly the most expensive thing in the world either. I think he's slated to make like $12 million this year. And by the time the trade deadline rolls around, that cap hit's going to be a touch lower than that even, given the Patriots are already paying part of that salary at this point. So I think if you want to go get a veteran guy who's won 2 Super Bowls, been part of 5 playoff trips in New England, definitely knows what it takes to make a deep playoff run, I think that's a good guy to go get.
And 3 seasons worth of crossover with Brian Flores.
Right.
So it would be, that one would actually probably be the smartest on any article you'd read about trade targets because of the Flores connection and then that Patriots pedigree. I can guarantee you that the Vikings will have a cornerback CB injury before too long. There is no way you go through your entire season with all 3 starters, just pristine health, especially ones who Shaq Griffin was 28 or so. And none of the guys are young. Gilmore is 30, 31?
34, 35.
Oh God. Yeah, that's right. He is 34. So Caleb Evans will soon be the next man up, or we'll get a look at our guy, Dwight McLaughlin. So this one would make a lot of sense. The Flores connection, and that team is going to be by the deadline 1-6 or something. And so get Jones the hell out of there so he can contend for another Super Bowl. And that's also, I know perhaps some think it's hogwash, but that Super Bowl experience, or at least a playoff run experience, Gilmore has it too. It would be pretty fantastic for the Vikings to have a little bit of that, because it just seems like at 4-0, it's going to need a 2016 like meltdown for them not to get to the postseason. Do you like, before we jump into the Jets, do you like anything on offense? Like Cortland Sutton's been in the trade rumor mill since Sean Payton got there. I don't know if DeAndre Hopkins will stick around on a team that's 0 and blah, 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 or 1 and blah, blah, blah. Devontae Adams is on the block. I don't know if the Vikings have the horses to get him. Only reason I mention this is because Jordan Addison, in theory, could be suspended. His court date, I believe, is Monday, if that all goes like according to the schedule. And I don't know if they're going to suspend him in season or wait until next year. Do you have any side-eyeing at other wide receivers, or would you just roll with it?
I mean, if you're telling me that the Vikings can go get like a guy like Cortland Sutton, Devontae Adams, somebody like that, I'm not going to say no to the Vikings adding a third like WR1, WR2 type player to their offense alongside Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones in the backfield. Like, if you want to give Sam Darnold as much help as possible and keep the good times rolling with this Darnold rejuvenation, I think a wide receiver would be absolutely awesome and just continue to suffocate opposing defenses is what I think the Vikings need to be able to do. And like the reason they won that game in Green Bay is because their offense was able to just get all over Green Bay's defense and put up too many points to the point where Green Bay didn't have enough time to come back and win that game. They almost did, but it was just a little bit too little too late at some point for Green Bay. So I think if you can go get a guy like a Sutton and not give up too much draft capital in order to bring him in, because is Sutton on a expiring deal? I don't even remember it anymore.
If it isn't expiring, it's not that difficult to finagle to get on a new team. Right. He was never paid handsomely. I remember one of my Broncos fans' friends was so elated that when they locked him and was it Tim Patrick down for the long haul because it was team friendly. I think he might still be on those. But yeah, and then the trade price for Hopkins or Sutton would be like 5th, 6th round or something like that. If Devontae Adams, if the Vikings were in that sweepstakes, I don't know if they would be. That'd probably cost a 3rd. I know the Raiders want a 2nd, but that's not happening. So the wide receivers, those would be the notable ones. There will always be other trade targets the Vikings can pursue. But it's really cool, once again, that we are buyers when most – if I would have predicted this, I would have had them probably taking it easy, maybe shipping off like a Caleb Evans for a 6th rounder if they were, 3-5 or whatever we thought they were going to be. But no. They have to avoid being like the Twins, and make sure if they want to make a run, they got to go join the arms race. All right, let's talk Jets for the next 5 minutes. I don't know if this will be breaking news, but I don't think the Vikings are going to beat the Jets. It's kind of sad to say. The Jets are going to be, I think, desperate after a lousy loss over the Broncos, 10-9, shitty weather. Aaron Rodgers knows the Vikings about probably 35-40% of this roster. And then I still have the feeling of watching the last hour and a half of the Vikings game where they appeared human and no longer cyborgs. I've been a fan for almost 3 decades, and to me, I just have this nagging feeling that this is a game that they're going to drop, which will not have me, bitching to high heavens about, I can't believe we lost the Jets. I'll be like, oh, it was bound to happen. Just like Will Reichert, I want him to miss a field goal soon so we don't have this Gary Anderson thing going into the playoffs. What do you think? I'm sure you're going to dial me back here. Do you think the Vikings – tell me what you are thinking about Jets and Vikings.
Well, first of all, I think we have to see what's going on with Aaron Rodgers' knee before we can really decide anything at this point because, man, that dude got beat up on Sunday against Denver, and he did not look good either. So, honestly, I think you asked me about, like, the things that I like and the things that I don't like about this Jets matchup. Is it crazy to say that I like the quarterback matchup at this point where Aaron Rodgers just looks – pedestrian at best through the first 4 weeks and Sam Darnold is the MVP? Like, I just don't see a world where all of a sudden in 1 week those two things are going to completely flip-flop. Like, obviously Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he's washed or anything, but you have that knee injury going into Sunday. I think the Vikings are catching him at the exact right time where this Jets offense has just been lackadaisical throughout the entire start of the season. And with Brian Flores just being able to do whatever he wants on the defensive side of the ball, I think that the Vikings defense is going to be able to wreak havoc on New York's, especially that offensive line that they brought in all these veteran guys and they were convinced, everybody was convinced that it was going to be great. But so far, it just doesn't look like that. That offensive line looks old. That offensive line looks slow, and they haven't been able to stop anybody. Breece Hall, who was one of my favorite guys coming out of that draft class, just looks like maybe a top 25 running back at this point through the first 4 weeks of the season. Like, he has not been anything special. So I honestly think that the Vikings might win this one pretty handily. Obviously, being in London is going to make things probably a little bit different. So it might be a little bit closer than it would have been if it was at, say, US Bank Stadium. But I do think that the Vikings are going to win this game.
Well, good. That's what we want to happen. It's funny that you mentioned Breece Hall. All of the big three of fantasy football running backs, Bijan, Etienne, and Breece, like, they're not horrible. They're just not living up to where they should be, where you draft them.
Yeah. It's terrible that people are giving up, like, they're drafting him like 2nd overall, giving up $60 in auction drafts to get what they're getting out of them.
Yeah, they're just not doing much. Speaking of fantasy, before we finish up on the Jets, for fantasy managers, is Mark Andrews washed?
Well, I'm one of the Mark Andrews managers, and so I didn't start him last weekend, and it turned out to be the right decision because again, he didn't catch a single pass. I started Cole Kmet instead because I just don't think that I think Isaiah Likely is kind of just taking over that spot, and Derrick Henry turning back into the old Derrick Henry where the Baltimore only has to throw the ball like 15, 20 times a game. I think that's eating into some of Andrews' production. So yeah, I just don't really see a path forward, and at least in 2024, for Andrews to become a top 5 tight end like we're used to.
Yeah, I was curious about this because he's only 29, and I know that tight ends can start to slow down, but he was so prolific. But all right, this isn't Ravens now. All right, I have in the Jets defense. That's one thing I forgot to call out in my little speech. That it's not as good as the Vikings is playing.
It's good.
But they have the dudes, and that's why that game was so tight. Yeah, I think Rodgers, whether or not the knee is 100%, he came out and said on the Pat McAfee show that it, is sore or whatever. So if he's revealing that and they're calling it normal wear and tear, this is not a good defense to face if you have a bum knee and you're my age. Rodgers and I are like 2 months apart. So we shall see. I have the Vikings losing, and this is really just based on something nagging inside me. Like, this is going to be the one they lose, and then they'll be ready for the Lions game. I think that's my mindset. I think I have them losing 24-21. Do you have them winning? You said convincingly. What's the score?
I think since it's in London, I'm going to be eased up on the convincingly a little bit just because travel things and everything. I'm going to go Vikings 17, Jets 10.
Oh, okay. So it'll be one of those types of games where a throwback to the defensive era of football.
Yep.
All right, my man. Well, let's see. Next week, we will be on a bye week, probably starting to ratchet up which free agents could they sign, or if they're 5-0, like what what home field advantage would look like. Isn't that weird?
That is crazy. Hey, real quick, can I geek out about this 2025 draft class?
Yeah, let's hear
it. A little bit of time. Yeah, no, I wrote on our website Draft Huddle that I think this draft class is going to be one of the most interesting draft class that we've seen in years. Between I don't know if you've watched too much college football this year, but Travis Hunter, the cornerback / wide receiver at Colorado, I think he's going number 1 overall. And if he's a wide receiver, I think he's the first ever wide receiver to go number 1 overall. And then you've got another guy in Arizona who's probably going number 2, number 3. There's a bunch of quarterbacks that there isn't really a consensus pick at this point between like Carson Beck. I think a lot of people had pegged in as like the QB1 of this class, but Jalen Milroe in Alabama just beat him. And Quinn Ewers, maybe if he comes back healthy, he's got a role there. Cam Ward in Miami is looking fantastic. So this is just it's a really fascinating draft class so far. And as much as I love this Vikings football season. I wish it will never end, and I hope it ends up in the Super Bowl. But I'm very stoked to get into some draft coverage this winter and spring.
Oh, you're not going to mention is it Ashton Genty?
Ashton. Oh, my apologies. I love Ashton Genty. That dude is just I think he's the next top 10 running back. Like, I legitimately think he's going top 10 because this dude's on pace to threaten all of Barry Sanders' rushing records in college football. Like, he's on pace for over 2,500 rushing yards, 10 yards a carry, 39 rushing touchdowns. He's got 13 touchdowns in 4 games. It's just this dude is absolutely fantastic. And as an Idaho homer, Boise State is one of my teams that I root for on college football, and it's really cool to see. It's been fun to watch. So yeah, I love Ashton Genty.
So barring injury, you think he'll be a top 10, top 12er in this NFL?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, I don't know if you've noticed over the past few weeks, but teams can't really throw the ball in the NFL anymore. And I think I think the market on running backs kind of overcorrected itself to where we're not necessarily valuing them as much as we should, especially those top guys. And I think some teams are going to realize that this offseason and try to go get that guy. Los Angeles, he would be a fun guy in Jim Harbaugh's offense in Los Angeles. So that's kind of where I'm pegging him right now.
Yeah, it'll further the tumble in general, or the fancy tumble of Justin Herbert. Is just you don't even think about starting him now. Unbelievable that, and that's not that he sucks. It's just that he's not going to put up the numbers. And if you needed him, he played for the Vikings. He'd be throwing 320, 3 touchdowns, 0 picks. It's so weird how one system like Harbaugh's can be like, no, we don't need that prolific shit. Get that the hell out of here. Okay, sir. We'll talk to you next Wednesday during the bye. Hopefully about a 5-0 team. All right.
Sounds great, man. See you then.
Yep. Later. Skol, baby.